Hello. Welcome to the Special Report, today in a slightly different format. Later in the program, we bring you the drama of multiple murderer Joe Mamasela's testimony at the amnesty hearings, and we show you the Eastern Cape House of Horrors, the post-Chalmers police station where many activists were tortured and killed. But we kick off with something rather unusual for the Special Report. This is the 85th edition of this program. It is also the third last program. The last one will be broadcast in 2 weeks' time. We thought it a good time to look at the big picture of the Truth Commission process, to look back over the last 2 years and ask, has the process been successful? How much truth have we had? Has the Truth Commission contributed to national reconciliation, or has it indeed been counterproductive, as some of its critics claim? I have 4 very interesting public personalities in the studio to discuss these questions. With me in Johannesburg is Dr. Maki Mandela, Director of Human Resources at Spoornet, and Donald Woods, journalist, author, and former newspaper editor. In Cape Town, we have Mr. Abraham Mzizi, IFP Member of Parliament, and Professor Herman Gqozo, UCT academic and political commentator. Good evening to you all. Maybe we should start in Cape Town. Professor Gqozo, could you give us an idea of the public perception of the Truth Commission process so far?
I think the best indicator we have is the most recent public opinion poll that was published about a week ago. It's a marked data poll, and it shows that at the moment only half of the South African population is prepared to endorse a statement that the Truth Commission is impartial. Only 45% of the total population think it will bring about reconciliation, and only less than 20%, 1/5, thinks that the people who had suffered gross human rights violations, would be prepared to forgive or forget. The majority of people, this is the entire population, feel that people will become more angry and they will be more hurt by the process. So,
how strong is the racial division in this poll, in this opinion poll?
Well, the interesting thing is one has the impression that that it's only the Afrikaners that is very much opposed to the Truth Commission and believe it's not impartial. But if you look at it, about only 14% Afrikaners and 50% Jews consider it impartial. But at the moment, among Africans, about 62%, 2/3, still believe it is impartial, and the slight majority still believe that it will bring about reconciliation.
Well, let's go straight to you in Cape Town to Mr. Mzizi. The perceptions in your part of the world and in your specific political party, could you talk about that to us, the IFP's perception? Has it been one-sided? Has it been fair?
Well, Max, I think you have hit the nail when you say it has been one-sided. We feel we have the same perception.
I'm asking, I'm not saying.
In fact, I just comment you have now probably have said the right thing. It's unusual where journalists always say the right thing at the right time. We feel the same, that we have been left in the cold, in that the structure of the TRC, it was a political appointee, and therefore it has left too many people out, and whatever it has happened in the long run, it became clear that it was an ANC political tool to destroy its opponent. That is the perception we have.
So it was one-sided in terms of the old order and one-sided as regards to the Inkatha Freedom Party?
Exactly. Probably even not to the Inkatha Freedom Party, to the people at large in South Africa. Because even if you have listened to all those people after the hearing, when they were asked whether are you going to forgive, they had reservations that, yes, I can forgive if this is it, if that is it. But in the truth and the crux of the matter is that people feel that the wounds were beginning to heal. And now the TRC has not actually tampered with the healing wound. They have inflicted actually the new wounds into the hearts of the people. And
all
therefore...
Right. Let's get stuck into that. Dr. Mandela, we talked about perceptions now, but Mr. Mzizi is bringing up something else. The whole question of the reopening of old wounds. He just said the healing had begun, but now the Truth Commission has scratched open the wounds. Do you agree with that perception?
No, I think it's a matter of interpretation where you are. I don't think that the Truth Commission has opened up any wounds. I don't think that the healing had begun in this country. I think that if people say that they are creating a myth, a facade, it's not true. But I think that we have to actually evaluate the effectiveness of the Truth Commission in terms of what it was intended to do in the beginning. I firmly believe that if the intention of the Truth Commission was actually to unearth the sins of the past, so that people should actually have a sense of the truth of what, in a sort of a much more objective. I know that it's a highly subjective process. Then we have to go through it. Whether the process then leads us to reconciliation is another issue altogether.
Are you saying we had enough truth, or we didn't have enough truth to form a picture?
I think that some truth has come out. Whether we have had enough truth, I doubt that. But I think that some glimmer of light has come out in terms of what has happened to certain people. Not the whole truth have come out.
Do you think there's a correlation between the two in the sense that if you have X amount of truth, that will buy you reconciliation? Is there?
No, I don't think so. I think, for me, reconciliation is much more than just the truth. Even if we had had the whole truth, I don't think that still there would be reconciliation. Reconciliation is a personal journey. It's an internal thing. And people interpret it in terms of how it affects their lives. It's not just about people coming and say, well, I committed that, and that's the end. You must understand that a whole group of people were subjected to severe oppression. There were others who were worse victims than the others. But it's a whole group of people. And if there's going to be reconciliation, you have to address all those iniquities, not just part of the iniquities and the social injustices that were committed.
All right, we're going to come back to the heart of what is reconciliation. But Donald Woods, to talk to me about what you feel so far, perception-wise, has it been one-sided? What is your feeling about this?
I've had the impression of it being pretty fair. But, you know, they were on a no-win situation in the sense that when you undertake something which is really a very courageous experiment, you're not going to come out with universal approval anyway. And given that, I think they've done a terrific job because quite apart from whether or not there's been enough ventilation, of course there hasn't been, I think that would be impossible to achieve. I think what we must remember is the educational value of this process. A lot of people, and I know from their comments, who didn't really believe the security police were that bad, now are horrified at these stories coming out. And of course, a lot of people who knew they were bad are glad to see that these truths are coming out. So I think we mustn't neglect the educational side of the Truth Commission.
All right. Let me go back to Cape Town, and I want to ask both of you in Cape Town. Can you imagine, this is now 2 years after the process had started. Let me speak for myself, because I'm going to try to be very neutral, but I'm not, because I've lived with this process for 2 years through this program. So forgive me if I have views on it. But I can hardly imagine South Africa trying to go into the future without having had this process. If you look back now at the role that the process had played in our public life, week after week on television, on the radio, in the newspapers, a constant interaction with it. Herman Gqozo, can you actually say that we should have done without this process?
Well, you know, I don't think this process was the only alternative. One could have had trials. One could have had trials along the Kok trial, now the Ferdi Barnard trial. My whole feeling about the Truth Commission, there was very little observance of judicial procedure. So one doesn't know the exact value of the truth, or the so-called truth that has been established.
Was that a feasible option, though, to go the judicial process where you have cross-examination?
The arguments that people brought against it is that, no, the courts can't handle it. But now we have the situation that the Truth Commission can't handle it. So I think one should have had the continuation of prosecutions. It should have been proper trials. They could have provided for more courts, more prosecution teams. But I think we have, in many cases, have had a travesty of the truth. And if I could just respond to Dr. Mandela, it was in fact because it was promised that there will be reconciliation that the main opposition parties, the IFP and the NP, went along with this Truth Commission. I don't think they would have given their approval because there was no revolutionary victory. They would have given their approval to such a one-sided process. And secondly, to a process that, according to the poll that I just cited, only aggravates injuries, aggravates the hurt, aggravates the racial polarization.
Do you want to respond, or can I ask Professor Gqozo some more questions?
I mean, for me, the issue is not whether the process, I mean, I know that the process was intended so that the perpetrators would feel comfortable. They should come forward. But then the question that should be asked is whether the perpetrators came forward with the truth, because with the whole truth, because I think that they came through with partial truth, however one interprets it. And that while it's the ideal was that we should reach reconciliation, I'm saying we have not. The reality is that it has not promoted reconciliation, and it will not, that process alone cannot never promote reconciliation in this country.
All right, let me just quickly, before we lose this thread, go back to Professor Gqozo. Professor, you talked about maybe we should have had trials. It should have been a continuation of that. In other words, a criminal judicial process. In other words, we should have, instead of amnesty, we should have charged these people, and if found guilty, they should go to jail instead of getting amnesty.
Yes.
But isn't that really the main problem of that you won't have reconciliation at all? That will, you're talking about Nuremberg type trials, which is far more dangerous in terms of reconciliation. Isn't that true?
Listen, I think this Nuremberg trials is simply a bogey that's not very credible at all. There was no revolutionary victory in the country. You only institute a Nuremberg type of trials when there's a complete defeat of the other side. So I don't think that was ever an option. But in terms of the truth, I mean, the courts, of course, are also not satisfactory. But what the Truth Commission tries to do is give you truth at a discount. They don't establish the proper procedures for testing the truth. And that's my main objection to the Truth Commission.
Well, would you say, let's just stay with that for a second. Would you say that of the amnesty process also, which is a judicial process, where you have judges and you go through cross-examination, and you have a full-on judicial process, and since June last year, that's the only stuff we've had with the Truth Commission, is the amnesty process. Is that your objection with that process too?
Well, I would say that I would have said that the Amnesty Commission was, according to my perception, not being a judicial person, was acting very much according to the spirit of the law until they gave a secret collective amnesty to the ANC leadership. To me, it's incomprehensible. And I believe that the National Party today has asked for the courts to set that aside.
No, the Truth Commission itself asked the courts to test
No, but
it.
because the Truth Commission has so postponed and sat on the whole issue that the National Party now today have decided to take legal action. And that's part of I mean, if you look at the one successful Truth Commission was the one in Chile, but there was complete faith in the representativity of the Commission because you had 4 of the old regime and 4 of the new regime. This one is totally skewed in favor of the ANC. And secondly, these people in Chile performed their task free of charge. They didn't have any income. And now we have this kind of gravy-trained truth commissioners, which all helps to sully the reputation of the TRC.
But I think, Professor, before we move on, just have to point out one thing. The Truth Commission in Chile was a secret process. Ours is on camera. Ours is a wide open process. So there wasn't much to criticize in the Chilean process because nobody knew what happened there. But let me go on to Mr. Mzizi. We're talking about a one-sided process, and you've felt that it was a one-sided process. In what sense? Do you think there should have been representation on the Truth Commission of other parties, like Professor Gqozo just said, 4 of the new, 4 of the old order? Or do you think the way the process was handled by the present commissioners was one-sided? Do you think that perpetrators and victims should have been treated differently? Do you think old order policemen and guerrilla fighters of the previous liberation movements should have been treated the same way? Can you specify what you mean?
Max, probably let's start off here. We talk of 2 phrases here, the truth, and the other phrase is reconciliation. Now, if I may ask a question, what is the color of the truth? Who can define the truth? And simply the answer is that the truth has got no color. And nobody can define the truth because the truth lies between me and God. He's the only one who could probably establish the truth. When we said that these processes should probably be given to court, it was that we knew that the evidence would be weighed and the perpetrators would have been prosecuted, which was the case. And the ANC had chosen that no, we want to part with the past, knowing who we forgive, and so forth and so forth. But if you look back, more than 21,000 of ANC members were given blanket amnesty. We don't know what they have done, and we don't know why should we pardon them. And we have touched on the 37 ANC members who were recently been given that blanket amnesty after the act has been actually passed. That I was actually in that a committee which was dealing with the act, that no person would be probably given a blanket amnesty unless that person appears before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now we wonder why these people were given that kind of a blanket amnesty. But having said that, I think we have failed completely in that the Truth and Reconciliation structure, it's not fully represented. I don't mean that the IFP should have been there, but it should have been a process where it was not a political appointees, where people would have been consulted who would serve in that commission. Up until now, Max, I think the world at large will agree with me that only people who have been brought forward to appear before the Truth and Reconciliation are ANC, so-called ANC victims. None of other parties have been called forward.
But isn't that exactly your responsibility as the IFP? You are now, with respect, I think you are like the man who killed his parents and then claimed sympathy because he was an orphan. You didn't want to go to the Truth Commission. You discouraged your members from going to the Truth Commission.
I knew, Max, you would come up with that. That's not true. We have never said that people should not go to appear before the Truth and Reconciliation. And that was the media which misconstrued that. What we said is that an individual should go to the Truth and Reconciliation should that individual feel free to do so. But we are not saying go and appear on behalf of IFP. And hence, in September 1996, my leader and the party appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation, and we disclosed what we have heard and what we know. And therefore, it was up to an individual. And I may go on further and say that individuals have done so. They have submitted their statement. They have never been called up until this moment. There are crucial issues which could have come to light, and ANC probably, if I may not ANC, but let me say the Truth and Reconciliation structure has probably deliberately avoided to call the IFP members to probably testify before them.
Right.
I do have statements that are in their possession, and those statements have not seen light up until date.
Thank you. Let's go back to come back to Johannesburg. The question of equal treatment, of one-sidedness. Let's take one part of that. I'm speaking to both of you. Should we have treated, or should the Truth Commission have treated perpetrators of gross human rights violation on the apartheid government side on exactly the same level as perpetrators of gross human rights on the liberation movement side? Dr. Mandela, your feelings?
Well, I think that if a country has decided that we're going to go through a Truth Commission in an era where we have just established a democratic country which is free, some level of fairness, one would say, objectively should have prevailed. But
did it, do you think?
I think to a certain extent it did. One has to understand that I don't think that there is any process that has been engineered by human beings that has ever been perfect. And one cannot expect that this process engineered by the ANC should be perfect in every respect. It's an experiment, as Donald Woods has said, experiments of its first kind in the world, and hopefully we will learn from that experiment. But I think that the ANC has been very open, very transparent in terms of how it has done things. Yes, people can complain that these were political appointees. It was the process that was in place. But the process, right from its inception, was transparent.
Did I hear a comment from Cape Town? Did you want to come in, Mr. Mzizi?
Yes.
In fact, a quick word from you before I go to Donald Woods.
Yes, I feel that the process is one-sided in that even if it would have been probably everybody should have been invited, whether this has been actually engineered by ANC, we did not oppose this. We said, yes, we all want to know the truth. Yes, we differ in the method how we establish the truth. And we felt that if a human being, a person like the clergy people, could be the people that would probably engineer or facilitate this, the very clergy people were the people in the past whom we find that they were assisting the very comrades who were actually necklacing the councillors, and they were actually providing them with attorneys, with providing them with finance. Now, where the fairness would be if we had decided that the clergy people would be the right people to facilitate this, either than the court would have not taken side.
Okay, let's get some comments in Johannesburg.
Max, I'd rather focus on where the Truth Commission has succeeded, to me, as a viewer.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I think that, a lot of people in the case of Steve Biko's killing wanted this not to be part of the TRC process. Their argument was, let's prosecute the killers and imprison them. Fine, if you can find evidence, but there was no evidence. And so I think what happened has been a very healthy development. Now, what happened was, of course we didn't get the whole truth, but at last we saw these faces for the whole country to see, and to see them lying, and to the extent that they were. Some of them came out with some of the truth, and some of them lied. But, people are not fools, and they can see for themselves on television, and they can judge at what point the person has departed from the truth or is covering up themselves. Now, that in itself is a very strong sanction, because, how would you like to live the rest of your life in South Africa for it to be known you were one of the killers of Steve Biko and you lied about it?
Well, I think the opposition, the criticism of that is that what you're talking about is the opening up of wounds.
Yes, a new wound.
And that's what Herman Gqozo has said, and Mr. Mzizi.
The wounds were open. The wounds were wide open. In fact, if anything, this has helped to some extent to cleanse them, I think. And the criticism that, these people aren't being punished. There are many forms of punishment, and even conscience and public sanction is a form of punishment.
Professor Kalimia?
Well, I've got great trouble with Donald Woods' assertion that people know when they hear the truth or not. I think as a newspaper editor, I think he probably will say, no, that is not quite true. The point is that certainly in the case of the Biko case, we have had revelations, slightly more than we've had after reading your book, which is very good, by the way. But the point is, I would like to know, how could you actually say that it brings about reconciliation if only 1/5 of the South African population believes so? Secondly, in terms of the Chilean Commission, yes, the report was secret, but the report was respected. And now we have here, the proceedings were secret, but the report was respected. Now we have here the Truth Commissioner, one of them, saying that they want to write a publicly sanctioned history. Now, there's no historian on the Truth Commission. There's no political scientist on the Truth Commission. It seems to me a totally mistaken...
Good or bad?
Sorry?
Is that good or bad?
To say that you're going to write a publicly sanctioned history, that is the kind of stuff that one
hears.
hears.
I'm talking about a political scientist and a historian.
Well, I think they have a certain approach. I'm a historian. I think historians, political scientists, novelists have a certain approach. I'm terribly scared of a commission headed by priests and lawyers. I think it's a terrible combination. No one of them talk about the processes. They talk about moral or secular guilt. And if you want to establish guilt, why don't you go about it the right way and establish guilt according to the only way that we know it, namely cross-examination, proper cross-examination.
But that certainly is the case in the amnesty process. We've seen George Bezos spending days and weeks cross-examining people like Clive Darby Lewis and the other way around.
I've agreed that the Amnesty Commission performed well until they gave that collective amnesty to the ANC leadership.
All right. You want to come back?
No, simply I think the George Bezos example is good, also for the Biko killers. We heard these questions, these probing questions, and unlike the original so-called inquest where half the stuff couldn't be brought out, at least the public, and I take Herman's point that it may be 20% or whatever, it's still a lot of South Africans,
Yeah.
And it's, in fact, if I was a TV producer, I'd be quite happy to have 20% of the South African people as a whole watching.
Can I go back quickly before you go on to Professor Herman Gqozo? The point that Donald Woods has just made, Professor, that he says, well, let's look at what the Truth Commission has achieved. I want to ask you to answer that question. What do you, you have your criticism, and we've noticed that, but what do you think they have achieved? Are there some positive things that you can say about the Truth Commission process?
I would say that there's been a reduction of the number of publicly sanctioned government lies. There's a few lies which the government told in the past which were exposed. So the number of publicly permissible lies have been reduced considerably. That's a gain. At the same time, one must remember that a nation, as an old Frenchman said in the 19th century, a nation is based on great forgettings and great rememberings. We, in fact, at the moment, we now remember what had happened to Steve Biko and the terrible tragedy. But this prolonged process of which looks like it's extending to 3 or 4 years, with weekly repetitions of atrocities, and very one-sided. I agree with my fellow Capetonian here, very heavily emphasized in Carter and the National Party. I can't for the life of me see that this can bring about reconciliation.
All right, Donald?
Well, we used to hear so many complaints in the bad old days that the allegations of people like ourselves against the security police were exaggerations, were unpatriotic, were disloyal, and untrue. And Herman must take the point, surely, that there are, even the supporters of such people in the past have had to confront the fact. But they've heard this coming out of their own mouths of these people now.
But Donald, that's what I've just said.
Unbelievably terrible things for one human being to do to another. And to admit it and to say, I hit him on the head with a steel spring, I stabbed him so many times, I burnt the body. Now at last, surely they have to accept these things happen.
But Donald, I've just acknowledged, I said there is now far fewer publicly permissible lies. Governments can lie about certain security matters, say nuclear war or things like that, but in terms of what the government in the past has done and its complicity in human rights abuses, we know that now. I think that is a gain. It'll be much more difficult in the future for governments to lie. So I conceded that.
Let me ask Abram Zizi in Cape Town, do you think there's been a value in exposing things like Vlakplaas, the CCB, the horrors that we didn't know? Do you think there is a value to you as a citizen knowing those things now?
Max, nevertheless, yes, some people did not know anything about Vlakplaas. But the crux of the matter is that I don't think any truth has been established there. You have spoken of Mamasela and many others. You find a group of people coming to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, disclosing what they have done.
Yes.
And they contradict themselves to a large degree. Now one wonders.
Well, even people like Eugene de Kock, who was the commander, and Dirk Coetzee, who was the commander.
None of them come and say, yes, collectively we have done this. If you would have listened to Mamasela's evidence now of recently, he tells a complete story different to what his colleague has said. Now, who could believe that truth? Because you can't cross-examine that person.
So
that
you're
is
saying we should rather have not heard anything of this at all?
Yes, I'm still with you. Look, what I say, yes, we should have known what happened in the past, but in the manner that we should have said, this is the book, let's close the book, no government or no future government will go that route. Probably let me echo in this way, how probably we are perceiving this report, even if it is going to be compiled. Now, at the exclusion of evidences of other parties. Now, we have a situation where we are seated with all the victims that are looking forward to be given a reparation at the end of the day, which they are going to miss as far as I'm concerned. In the sense that the Gqozo massacre, nobody is bothering about it. The Crossroad Katlehong massacre, nobody is bothering about it. The score metal execution style of people who were ordered to lie down and kick there, nobody speaks about it. I have a case in Heidelberg where the police had blown one Kanyila into pieces.
Why didn't you take that story to the Truth Commission? Why didn't you ask the Truth Commission to investigate it?
We have disclosed 434 IFP members. You know what had happened recently? The person who was compiling that report was subpoenaed to appear before the commission to testify how she had compiled that report. None has happened to the ANC. Now we wonder why. Are they trying to intimidate her or not? Right. These are some of the things that makes us now to question the integrity of the Truth and Reconciliation.
Thank you. Donald Woods?
A quick point. Since I've been back in South Africa, I've met very few whites who knew anything about the Kasinga massacre, much bigger massacre than any of these others. And for the first time through the TRC, this came to light. I think last week was in your program. So, again, I get back to the educational value. People are learning things they didn't know before. And it's one thing for an intellectual like Herman to say, we know these guys lied in the past. But the ordinary person in the street, the guy who likes to carry the old flag and everything, I think they need more education.
All right. We only have 5 minutes left, and I want to address the whole concept of reconciliation now. Maki Mandela, let's look at what has happened in the Truth Commission in terms of reconciliation and what lies ahead. Your views, where are we now in terms of reconciliation? Are we stuck in a racial divide?
I don't think, as I said before, I mean, the Truth Commission, I don't think that has promoted reconciliation. As I said, to me, reconciliation is much more than that. I think that...
would you have preferred us not to have had a Truth Commission in terms of reconciliation?
A Truth Commission, I think that we should have had. And I think that it has been nice, as Donald Woods for the educational thing, I think that it forced a lot of those people who also denied their actions to come to terms with their actions.
But then
that's a different to say that it's promoting reconciliation. Because
so it's the Truth Commission, not the Truth and Reconciliation
Yes,
Commission.
It's the Truth Commission, not the Truth and Reconciliation
What
Commission.
is reconciliation then?
For me, reconciliation is to say that we are going to address all the social injustices and inequities of the past. Yes, you can have the Truth Commission where people confess their truth. But if nothing changes in the fundamental basic conditions of the black people who were affected by apartheid, how do they reconcile? They reconcile with what?
But isn't that the ruling ANC's problem?
It's not just the ruling ANC.
This is a government problem, isn't it?
This is not just a government problem. It's a problem of every citizen of this country, especially those who benefited most from apartheid.
Max, could I say something here?
Yes, please.
Yeah. You see, I think this is part of my problem with the TRC, and this is that it becomes a slippery slope. It's now being used to demand black restitution to blacks, redistribution of wealth. Bishop Tutu says that if I steal your pen and I've asked for forgiveness, it's no good if I don't return your pen. Now, what previous Truth Commissions have established is that the conflict must be over before you actually tackle a Truth Commission, like in Chile, before you introduce a Truth Commission. Now, my feeling is that all the revelations of atrocities are being used to try and coerce whites and to imbue them with a guilt consciousness so that they pay some kind of reparation tax. Redistribution must take place. Black empowerment must take place. But I think the Truth Commission is being used for devious purposes here.
Mr. Mzizi, your view on reconciliation?
Yes, if I may chip in there. Marx, who are we reconciling? We have failed utterly to reconcile the people, if you are saying that. If probably...
But maybe that is the question. Who should we be reconciling?
Exactly.
Are we talking about black people and white people rushing into the streets and hugging each other and saying...
It's an ambiguous term. Because if you look at the violence of the past, the freedom fighters were actually fighting apartheid. Now, there was a black-on-black violence. Now, where was the apartheid in black-on-black violence? We have suffered in the hands of the so-called liberators.
Are you saying there can be reconciliation without the truth?
Without the truth, there would be no reconciliation. Now, what happened, the act goes as far as back saying that even the human rights violation that took place outside the country. When are we going to start hearing about the Quadro camps and many other camps outside the country?
Well, the Truth Commission has said that they're going to have a special hearing on that soon, in the next few weeks.
Yes, what they will do probably, right at the end, they will disclose a report that said, we found nothing, there's nothing that happened there. When we would have liked to see people who were actually in those camps coming forward and testify and give a chance to those who have lost their loved ones to come and say that, yes, I lost my loved one through this manner and that way. All those things, I don't think we have reconciled the people of this country. and also for the Truth and Reconciliation, at some stages, you find them taking sides, that concluding that other races or other ethnic grouping are guilty of certain offenses and they must now confess. When are they going to stop singing to the master's voice?
All right. Donald Woods, it so happens that you have the final word because we've run out of time.
Well, I agree with Marky in the sense that we've had more truth than reconciliation, but I think the truth was a necessary prerequisite. The reconciliation is still ahead of us. There's a lot of work to do, and I think both sides, not just the ANC, everyone, we've all got to work at this, and we've got to, in the process, I think too many whites still underestimate the level of black anger and resentment. And the mistake was made that now that it's all over, everything's fine. It's a nonsense. We're only starting now. And hopefully we'll get there, but I think this was a necessary part of the process.
You go along with that?
Yes, I agree with her fully.
Well, maybe we've neglected to get to certain parts of the process in this debate. We're certainly going to tackle it again. But, and also, if I were the Truth Commission, I'd be slightly worried. Not many positive things said about the Truth Commission process. But let's get on with the rest of the program. First, thank you very much to Donald Woods, Maki Mandela, and in Cape Town, Herman, Gqozo Meer, and Abraham Zizi. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's get on with the program. Tonight's episode in our series of profiles on the men and women behind the Truth Commission process is Dr. Gqozo.
Reverend Dr. Elliot Mbuyisa Gqozo was born at Umzimkhulu on a farm in the Eastern Cape. He later became a school teacher in Natal, which led him to become a preacher. That's when he decided to leave education and join the world of ministry.
So then when I was born at Umzimkhulu farm, I grew up there. But I schooled there, but my father was interested that we must not lose the touch with Natal. So most of my father's children, including me, did most of their schooling in Natal so that we could not lose in touch with our roots. That is why even when I became a teacher, I used to be a Zulu teacher because we were in contact with our roots. Because you know, when I grew up, my grandmother used to call me Mfundisi. So that there were some few people in our village who just called me Mfundisi. I don't know why, because of course I was quite a good kid, but I didn't see the signs of Mfundisi. Of course I used to go to the church, because with us it was compulsory that if you come from the Christian background, you must go to church.
Reverend Gqozo met his destiny preaching the word of God soon after he started teaching.
Just when there's a teacher, even before I joined the YMG, it was in a Rondavel house somewhere outside Malagas. There was no location, simply Rondavel house. And then when they were calling the people, those who wanted to join the YMG, I found myself joining. I don't know how it happened. So that was the start of the excitement. And then I joined the classes for local preachers. I studied for the local preacher and I became a full local preacher. Then, that's when, after that, I found that there was an edge for me to become a minister. So I candidated for the ministry in 1958. Wrote the exams. You write exams in the Methodist Church. I was a full local preacher by then. And I passed the exams. And because I was very much involved in the life of the young people in the Durban circuit, the superintendent minister was Reverend Skakana then, and these two circuit stewards, Mr. Mtolo and Mr. Masego, they appealed to the conference that they would like me, my first appointment, to be in Durban, so that I could continue with my work in the youth. So I was appointed. The conference, which met in 1958, appointed me to Lamontville. That is where I started my ministry, in Lamontville, where I was there 1959 and 60, before I went to Fort Hare for full training as a minister of the Methodist Church. And then I did my BA degree at Fort Hare. And then when I left Fort Hare at the end of 1963, I was posted by the conference to go and start a new station somewhere in a very rural area called Gqibeni in the district of Libote, at a place called Mahubeni Saget. I was a young person, married with a young child. We went there.
The following year, Reverend Gqozo got ordained as a minister and helped at the Blackberries Institution as a pseudo-chaplain. In 1964, he left for Chicago to further his studies, and when he came back in 1966, he served the Methodist Church in different areas.
I had 2 scholarships. I had a scholarship from Harvard and from Oxford, but I couldn't go to Oxford because it was only providing for me, not for my family. And Harvard was providing for me and my family. And having experienced that life when I went to Chicago and I left my family behind, I said, no way. I'll never go overseas without my family. So I took up the scholarship of Harvard. I was there from September 1970, and I came back at the end of 75. Well, I've got just 2 children. Of course, I lost 2 babies in the Transkei when I was the minister. You know, we used to minister in very rural areas where you didn't have doctors, where a child would just be caught by a flu, and then it was very hard to get the doctors around. So I don't want to remind myself about that experience. But I've got 2 children. I've got my son, Mkolisi. He started as a computer analyst. And my daughter, the one you saw here, after completing her BA and LLB in Natal University in Pietermaritzburg, she's on her last year doing articles now. She's finishing this year doing articles. And at the same time, she's also taking some courses here in Durban in conveyance, because she wants to specialize as a lawyer. And of course, I've got my wife, Stella. You saw her. When I got married to her, she was in charge of the theater at King Edward, a nursing sister. During those days, there were no black matrons. They were called senior sisters. She was a senior sister there. And then when we got married, she had to go with me.
When Reverend Gqozo was called to join the Truth Commission, he was initially reluctant because of his commitments with the Methodist Church, until a few influential friends convinced him that working on the Truth Commission would be a worthwhile national commitment.
I made the arrangement that though I'm in the Truth Commission with my side, I must be in the pulpit on Sunday, every Sunday. And it gives me strength. You see, that is my basis of the strength. I work the TRC things, I get tired, but I know that there's a spring from which I'm going to draw when it comes Sunday, when I meet the church people with their prayers and song and worship. You see, these are revelations. We thank the TRC that it was TRC for these stories to be revealed. That is why, though we don't like amnesty, most of us, we become sympathetic with it, because we say that if there was no amnesty, we would not have heard these stories. We would not have the exhumations of the tombs. I remember one mother from Port Shepstone who had her son exhumed. She says that, you know, when they came back from exile, I was waiting that my son is coming back. And all this time I've been waiting. When I saw the bus, people getting down at the bus stop, I used to look and say that, oh, my son will be coming. When I heard the knock at the door, I said that maybe that is my son. And she said, now I know that my son is normal, is killed. That I can get the bone and go and bury it, give it a decent burial. It does satisfy me, because I can never bring him back again.
14 years ago, 3 Eastern Cape activists known as the Pepco 3 were killed at a deserted former police station near Cradock. It is one of the most gruesome stories we have heard in 2 years of amnesty applications. This week, Joe Mamasela, self-confessed multiple murderer and ex-askari from Vlakplaas, gave his version of events. He is the only one involved in the killing of the Pepco 3 who has not applied for amnesty because he has turned state witness against the other applicants. Mamasela first gave his sensational version of the murders at Post Chalmers on this program in April 1996. His story differs from all the other amnesty applicants. It probably means that if the amnesty committee accepts his version, none of the other policemen will receive amnesty. But is Joe Mamasela telling the truth? Let's start right at the beginning of this terrible tale.
Champion Golela, Sipho Hashe, and Kakrahuli Godolozi were high-profile Eastern Cape activists who disappeared in May 1985 and were never seen or heard from again. Today we know they were abducted from Port Elizabeth Airport by Eastern Cape Security Branch, supported by a contingent of policemen from Vlakplaas.
The purpose, as I can remember, was to remove the 3 activists from society.
The abducted men were brought here to Post Chalmers, 250 kilometers from Port Elizabeth. Today, Post Chalmers is a deserted holiday farm. 14 years ago, it was a disused police station. Post Chalmers is remote and far enough from surrounding farms for activities to be private. This is probably why it was ideal for the Eastern Cape Security Branch to use for interrogations, killings, and the burning of bodies.
The morning after arriving at Post Chalmers, the policemen started preparing for the interrogation of their prisoners who'd been locked in this outbuilding overnight. They were removed from the outbuilding one by one for interrogation, and this is where the story starts to diverge. Joe Mamasela, an askari who was involved in this operation, sings a completely different song to all the other amnesty applicants. He says the men were removed and over the next 2 days were basically beaten and tortured to death. Their bodies then thrown back into this outbuilding.
We fetched Mr. Harsher, and as the briefcase was proceeding, his interrogation started with some ludicrous statements to humiliate him by Lieutenant Nivot at that time. He just grabbed an iron pipe and beat the poor old man several times in his head. And as he did so, all the people joined in. Now, the position of the old man at the time was such that he was in no position to defend himself. And the only thing he could help himself was just to scream out loud. I was then ordered by Lieutenant Nivot to stifle his screams, to put my hands in his mouth and hold it hard, so that his screams mustn't attract the neighboring farmers. As Lieutenant Nivot was beating the old man several times in the head with the iron pipe, I noticed that the blood was oozing from the old man's nostrils and ears, as well as the mouth. And I saw the old man's eyes turning into white pupils. They were turning. It was as if he was fainting or just about to die. The beatings went on and on until I saw the old man laying prostrate on the ground with blood all over his head and face. But when I came closer, I noticed that he was also slightly having difficulty with breathing, but he was breathing. I quickly rushed to fetch some water, and I just poured the water over him. This seemed to revive him. He began to talk, but I could see he was not telling the truth. He was merely trying to save himself. And Warrant Officer Kole asked him some question. I can't recall the nature of the question at the moment, which was perceived by the old man as a very stupid question. This extremely angered Warrant Officer Kole because he instinctively and brutally delivered a mule-like kick on the jaws of the old man. And at that stage, I saw white foam falling from the mouth of the old man. And he slowly collapsed. As he hit the floor, Warrant Officer Kole went berserk. And as he strangled him, the others that I've previously named waded in, beating the old man with sticks and beating him with iron bars. And Kole kept on just holding on like a vicious bull terrier on the old man's neck. And it became evident to me that he was dead. And when I looked at Warrant Officer Kole, he was bloodied all over. His clothing, his face, and even his shoes were bloodied. If one looked at him at that stage, one would have sincerely believed that he was the one who was being assaulted. In-state champion Golela was ordered out, and he was subjected to the same brutal treatment that the old man was subjected to. Because of his weak physical body, it was not long before he lay dead. I think his interrogation went on for 3 to 4 hours, and then he was dead. We were then ordered that myself, Kole, and Pete Mukhwai should remove these corpses and throw them back into the shed. I saw Godolozi sitting in a corner, at a far corner. He was a pathetic figure. He just stood there, shivering, as if he knew that his fate was just going to come. And the people were praying, they were drinking. College and Pete Mukhwai joined on the drinking spree. And they were discussing, as if they were discussing about a movie, as if what happened was nothing.
Mamasela spoke very little of his own actions during this torture. This man, who by his own admission helped kill more than 35 people for the security police, today insists that it was all against his will.
Griffiths Mnenge, did you do that because you were under duress?
Yes, it was in 1981.
Yes. And in 1985, in this matter, you got involved because you were acting under duress?
Yes, if I did not kill these people, I was going to be killed. It's a fact. More than 10 Askaris were killed for refusing to carry out their duties. And the main duty of Askaris was to kill their own black people.
12 years, Mr. Mamasela, you were part of the security police in South Africa. Is that right?
I was made part of. I was not part of. I was made part of against my will, against my political conviction.
Yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yes.
Against your political conviction.
Yes.
So what was your political conviction then at that time?
My political conviction at that time lies entirely with my organization, the African National Congress.
Your organization?
My organization, full stop.
Is that still today your organization?
No, it's no longer my organization because they sold me out on the Boas on a silver platter and then they left me out.
Do you know why your version in this matter, this PEPCO 3 matter, differs from all the other people who testified here?
Yes, it's because I'm telling the truth and they're covering up.
The Eastern Cape Security Branch vehemently deny Mamasela's version of how the PEPCO 3 were killed.
Kaptein van Sail het vir meneer Haashe met 'n .22 geweer geskiet. Hy het die geweer aan my oorhandig, waar ek op my beurt vir meneer Gqozo geskiet het. En meneer Lots het vir meneer Galela geskiet. En ons het al drie die oorledenes op die houtstapel geplaas.
Their bodies, they say, were burnt and the remains thrown into the Fish River at Cradock. The Amnesty Committee will now have to decide who to believe, because if they accept Joe Mamasela's version of what happened here, the other men are liars and will not get amnesty. But if they accept the versions of Gideon Nieuwoud and the others, then Joe Mamasela's story of what happened here is a lie. The one thing we do know is that 3 men lost their lives at Post Chalmers.
Post Chalmers is not only the place where the PEPCO 3 were killed. Today we know that this deserted farm and its house of horrors is also the place where the security police killed 2 other Eastern Cape activists, Siphiwe Mthimkhulu and his friend Topsy Mdaka. Vlakplaas, it seems, is not the only farm of death. Thank you for staying with us. The amnesty application of the Chris Hani killers continue in Johannesburg this week. We'll see you next Sunday at 6 or Monday at 1 p.m. Goodbye.